Thank you, Jeff. I remember a professor that I had in seminary, Dr. Hendry. He read that verse, that passage, and it says, we'll be cast out, and there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth, and some smart aleck in the class, not me, some smart aleck in the class said, look, what if people don't have any teeth? And Dr. Hendry said, teeth will be provided. So I want to talk with you this morning about ministry. And particularly about ministry in the church, given that this is Reformation Sunday. About those who are called to ministry, and about how we might be able to support those who are called to ministry. I want to talk with you about aspiration and affirmation. But first, let's pray. Wonderful, gracious God, we ask your blessing upon the words that are spoken and the words that are heard. By your Holy Spirit, may these words of mine become a word of God to us in witness to the living word, Jesus the Christ. Amen. Catherine had lived a challenging life with an abusive, alcoholic father and a resentful, bitter mother who was unable to take the children and leave for economic reasons. So Catherine married young as a way to escape the family. And as is often the case, she married a man similar to her father. But unlike her mother, Catherine did take her children after several years and ran. They were months homeless. There were many nights when they slept in their car. But eventually, after a series of menial jobs, she ended up as a night shift laborer in a local publishing company. And through a series of lucky breaks, she eventually became a writer for the company because she always had written well, and she always observed things about life and people and events. Catherine was sustained through her life by a strong spiritual connection with God. She identified strongly with the sufferings of Jesus Christ and gained hope and strength in the resurrection message of the gospel. She always had this sense that maybe God had something more in store for her. She always aspired to be something more, to do something different with her life, something holy. And so, years later, with the encouragement of her church and the affirmation of her pastor and her children, she started to take some classes. School during the day, work at night. She finished her undergraduate degree in 6 years. She graduated from seminary in another 7.5 years. She served as a student pastor in several places, one of which called her to be their permanent pastor, and somewhere around her 50th birthday, Catherine was ordained to the Christian ministry. That's one person's call to ministry. Mine was very different. I grew up in a loving family where there was never a time that I did not know Jesus Christ. Raised in the worship and the Sunday school and the youth ministry of the church, I aspired to be a pastor because I wanted to be like Roger. Roger was the young associate pastor that came to Salem United Church of Christ in Allentown, my home congregation, when I was in 9th grade. He and many, many others affirmed my sense of call, provided me with opportunities to experience the regional and the national church. I am a person of privilege whose parents could pay for college. My wife supported us as I completed seminary, and at 25, I was called to be the pastor of a congregation in Bethlehem. 2 two different call stories that are descriptive of what is heard by every admissions director and every judicatory official who has ever had the honor of listening to how God has gifted someone to become a minister. For some of us, we aspired to be pastors early in life. We were affirmed by many as teenagers and as young adults, and we checked off all the boxes, and we were ordained in our 20s. For others, the aspiration to be a pastor competed with all of the other realities of life, employment, and family, and poverty and abuse. Decade after decade, this nagging sense of call was always there, but the path got blocked until someone or some group, or both, provided enough affirmation and opportunity to be able to pursue the call. An easier path or a hard one, early in life or later, the end result is the same. Aspiration plus affirmation leads to consecration, being set apart for a holy purpose. Aspiration plus affirmation leads to consecration. All of you are here because you love and affirm the mission of the church. And further, I trust that you want the mission of the church, this congregation, the wider Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, the Church of Jesus Christ. I assume you want the church to continue and to thrive. And further, I think you would agree, given the fact that you've now been looking for a pastor for the last year or more, I think you would agree that it helps when organizations have a leader. Whether it's a school or a business or a municipality or a service organization or a congregation, any organization functions better with a leader. And leaders function better when they have some training. Right now, across the historic mainline Protestant church, Methodist, Lutheran, UCC, Presbyterian, Moravian, American Baptist, Southern Baptist, Episcopal, across the mainline historic Protestant church, there are enough pastors to serve all the congregations. In fact, there are a few extras, depending on where you are in the country, depending on the denomination. There's enough pastors now to serve the congregations that are out there. But that balance is going to be tipped in 5 to 10 years because every historic Protestant denomination across the country is poised to have two things happen. First, a big chunk of the current pastors will retire. And second, the 10-year decline in seminary enrollment in pastoral ministry programs will not be able to take up the slack. You heard me. 10 years of decline. In more than 200 seminaries across the United States and Canada, the enrollment has declined in the Master of Divinity program by 10% in the last 10 years. Collectively, the seminaries in the United States and Canada, more than 200 of them, have gone from a peak of about 81,000 pastoral ministry students in 2006 to just under 71,000 in 2014, a loss of 10,000 pastors. Right along with that, a pile of currently serving pastors are getting older. In the United Church of Christ, 52% of all clergy that are currently serving are 60 years or older. 28% are 50 years to 60. In the Lutheran Church, in 2013, 1/3 of the active pastors were 60 years or older. In the Presbyterian Church, 49% of the serving pastors are over 66 years old, and by 2026, 3/4 will be over 60 years old. Want some more good news? A new research study that was published in the New York Times in June found that the median age for pastors in the United States, all pastors in all churches, the median age is 57. So what do we do? What do we do? How do we ensure that there will be enough skilled, trained leaders for the next generation of folks in the historic Protestant churches in the United States? Now, that's a deceptively complex question. From just a congregational perspective, it involves attitudes towards shared ministry and shared pastors. It also has to do with this tendency that there are those congregations that value their buildings more than their ministry. But for our purposes today, let me focus on identifying those who may be called to ministry. My hunch is that there is at least one person here this morning who has been thinking about pastoral ministry. Now, before we go too far, I want to be clear that there are many people who are called to different forms of ministry: chaplaincy, teaching, mission work, counseling. I'm not focusing on those callings today. Today, we need to be talking about local church pastors, people who aspire to move through the process of authorization that is set in place by every denomination. And my hunch is that there are at least one person, there's at least one person here this morning, if not more, who has thought about that. Or perhaps it's not someone who's sitting here, but it's someone who you know. In the first letter of Peter, the apostle talks about the role of a church leader. And one of the things he talks about is how you are to be examples to the flock. Tend the flock of God that is in your charge, exercising oversight. Who do you know who's a good example? Who do you know who has the gifts of caring, pastoral caring, sensitivity? Who do you know that can coach and guide and teach and correct in such a way as to encourage others to follow? My hunch is that such a person has at some point, at least in a fleeting moment, said to themselves, you know, I could be a pastor. It's not too late. It's not too late for any of you who have had that sense of aspiration. At Moravian Seminary in Bethlehem, the average age of our students is 48 years old. It's not too late. All right. So there's a person who might have thought about an aspiration toward pastoral ministry. What do the rest of us need to do? Well, we need to affirm that aspiration. We need to affirm that call. And all too often, local congregations and pastors don't encourage and affirm the call to ministry in a strong enough way that overcomes the very common doubts and fears that come with the call. In my life experience, a clear call from God has always involved risk, usually financial risk. When I left my first place of ministry to go to a second place, a new social ministry organization to which I had been called, we had a 2-year-old daughter. My wife was pregnant with our son, and that new organization had 3 months of operating money in the bank. Accepting that call to ministry would not have happened without the affirmation of my wife, my ministry colleagues, the leaders in the ecumenical community, and the congregation that I had been serving. Yes, I'm sure there were a few of them who said they were glad to see me go, but most of them were affirming that new call to ministry. How do you affirm someone's call? First, you need to say to some folks, have you ever thought about being a pastor? People, regardless of age, need to hear that from many different mouths. You can say things like, you're a very caring person, like a pastor. You do a really good job of leading the Bible study. Boy, oh boy, I don't know how the church would function without your leadership help. Affirmation can be both general and specific, but we've got to affirm people. The second thing is, we need to provide an opportunity for people to kind of test out their skills. Can someone be encouraged to visit some housebound people or some hospital people? And will you allow your new pastor, when he or she arrives, will you allow that person to spend some time with this one who is discerning a call to provide some feedback and teaching? Can you encourage a person to lead the worship liturgy or to preach every so often? And again, will you provide feedback and encouragement? And finally, would the congregation, or at least some of you, be willing to provide a little financial help so that the person might be able to take a class or two at seminary and just test out whether or not this is a good idea? As an aside, I've experienced some people being very critical of another person's call to ministry. Bill never did pastor, or she's got enough problems of her own. The sense is that I'm not going to affirm a person's aspiration unless they'll become the kind of pastor that I like. But my friends, one of the things that I learned over time is that there is a ministry place for just about everybody. And it is the role of the wider church to make that determination. It's the role of the synod to make that decision. You, the local church, and more to the point, you, an individual, don't get to decide who's called to minister. So, I leave you today with a challenge to ask two questions. First, do you aspire to be a pastor? Or do you know someone who may have that sense of call? And second, how can you affirm that person's call? How can you nurture and support and guide and encourage a person that you know to move on a path towards serving as a local church pastor? It's up to all of us to watch for aspiration and to respond with affirmation. Literally, the future of pastoral leadership in the church depends upon it. Amen?
Amen.